Good day to you. I'm Jacqui Woodward-Smith, priestess of Avalon, and I'm going to talk about the bear goddess. So I'm going to talk about the bear goddess because in the Willowbridge Anna that I work with, this time of year, spring equinox, is the time of Arthur, who's the bear goddess, and it's fire and Auril as well. So she's the fire goddess. So I thought that that's why I would talk about the bear goddess. That is why I've set up this lovely altar with my spring equinox eggs that we can eat later. So bear worship, which is also known as arctolatry, is found in many North American and North Eurasian circumpolar regions. So really it's a northern tradition thing. And it's particularly prevalent amongst the Sami people, the Nevsk of Russia, and the Ainu of Japan. So they're all the northern tribes basically. And there are also a number of deities from Celtic Gaul and Britain associated with the bear. And she's frequently found in carvings amongst totemistic northern cultures. So really any cultures that have a totemistic, animistic, shamanistic way of being have some sort of bear deity. And there's a suggestion that bear worship may have been practiced as far back as the Middle Paleolithic period amongst the Neanderthals. Of course, there's often the idea that the Neanderthals didn't have any form of religion, and that's the difference between us and them, because religion is a symbolic thing and that they didn't have symbolism. But that suggests that they did. And I've always found that quite an odd suggestion that they didn't, because they did bury their dead. And they put flowers on them.
Yeah,
they
exactly,
put flowers on them.
Flowers
and ochre. They used ochre. So I don't.
And now they've been found with jewellery as well. So
yes. So I did shell jewellery and things like that, haven't they?
So
and I can't believe that is symbolic, because if somebody's died and then you decorate them, then that's not a practical thing. I mean, you could say that burying them is practical, but not if you decorate them as well. I mean, so that implies a sort of symbolism. And there is a suggestion then that they had a bear cult as well. So some archaeologists and anthropologists have suggested that the bear is the oldest form of deity known to hominids, let's call them, as we're talking about the Neanderthals as well. And cave bear skulls have been found from between 75,000 and 45,000 years ago, carefully arranged and marked with red ochre. And Emil Bachler has found such remains in Switzerland and Mornova Cave in Slovenia. And it's interesting because Colin and I were in Slovenia last weekend at a pagan conference, and I was talking about rediscovering the goddess from the landscape, and I thought, that'll be interesting because I'll talk about the bear goddess, because of course they've still got bears there. I didn't really know anything about what might have been there before, but they have found cave bear skulls in Slovenian caves, and I bought this little wooden bear in Slovenia because I found it, and then they gave us this calendar. They said they didn't know anything about their goddesses, but they made this whole calendar of Slovenian goddesses, and this is the goddess for July, Divana, who's the bear goddess, but it's all in Slovenian, so I can't. Somebody did read it out to us, but I can't remember what it said. But she's the goddess of the forest, which the bear goddess is nearly always linked to the forest, and she's got her baby bears, and she's got a bow there as well, which is a bit like Artemis, because Artemis's name comes from bear, which I'll mention later on. But she is like quite a stereotypical Artemis kind of figure in this picture. So if you can read Slovenian
goddess as well.
Modern. Oh yeah, they're interested in it. This is a very good calendar actually. You come and have a look. They're interesting pictures. And they're actually one of the people in the pictures is somebody we met, so that's quite odd as well to see somebody you know in the pictures. So Emil Bachler found remains in Switzerland and Mornova Cave in Slovenia. And André Leroy Goran found bear skulls arranged in a perfect circle at Saône-et-Loire, and he attributed that to the Neanderthals again. And they were marked with red ochre, so they'd set up these skulls in a perfect circle, marked them with red ochre. And most of the bear remains are found in caves, and there's no evidence in early human settlements so far, although there were so few settlements because there were so few people that I don't think that proves anything. But some archaeologists have suggested that argues against a bear cult, because bears lived in caves and they would have died in them. So they think that means that there wasn't a bear cult, but I don't really see how they would have died in a perfect circle and marked their own skulls. And the rest of the bones weren't there.
Yeah.
Only the skulls.
That's really clever bears.
The skulls are very interesting with bears. I'm going to talk a bit about their skulls later, but it seems to be the skulls that a lot of cultures are interested in. And I don't see how the bears would have left their heads in a cave
I think it was probably one very clever bear that took all the bones and
Colin thought it might have been wolves, but then that means wolves have got religion. So whoever did it is, So I think that was just an archaeologist being silly, really, and wanting to say the opposite to some other archaeologists, which is quite often what happens, isn't it?
yeah.
The World Heritage Site at Alta in the country of Finnmark in northern Norway reveals further evidence of an ancient interest in bears and a possible interpretation of what their meaning may have been to ancient people. The rock carvings or petroglyphs at Alta were first discovered in 1972, and since that time more than 5,000 carvings have been found on several sites. The main site contains around 3,000 individual carvings, and the earliest carvings date to around 4,200 BCE, and the most recent carvings are generally dated to around 500 BCE, although some people think that they may have carried on carving there until 500 CE, so that's a huge period of time, 5,000 years, that they would have been carving them. And there's a wide variety of imagery showing a culture of hunter-gatherers who practice shamanism involving bear worship. And again, some researchers believe that the Sami people, who are very interested in bears as part of their religion, are descendants of the carvers. And there are a wide range of animals depicted on the carved scenes, and reindeer predominate, which seems quite natural, really, because that's often the way in different caves. The animals that they would hunt would be the ones that predominated. And I could do another talk about the reindeer goddess. Oh yes, you'd be interested in that. I'll do a talk about that in the winter next time. And other animals appearing frequently are moose, various bird species and different kinds of fish. But they think that bears seem to have played a special role in the carvers' culture, and they feature prominently both as animals to be hunted, but also in ways that indicate that they may have worshipped them as well. They say the tracks left by the bears are particularly different to the tracks left by the other carvings. They carved tracks as though they were walking across the walls. And they say that all the other animals and humans are depicted with tracks that follow horizontally behind them, so the way they would in real life, as though they're walking through the snow. But the bears seem to be the only animals depicted with tracks occasionally shown leading vertically through the carved image or crossing the horizontal tracks of other animals. And they think that that is a symbol of the bears being linked to death and the afterlife, with the vertical tracks symbolising their ability to pass between the worlds. So the horizontal tracks are like the web, really, that we talk about, perhaps, the web of existence in the middle world, or the world that we're in, and the bears are travelling between the different worlds. And they think the depictions that were shown in that way seem to have stopped around 1700 BCE. So leading on from the idea of bears being linked with death and the ability to move between the worlds, we come to the beliefs of the Nivk of Russia and their ancient bear festival. The bear festival was always celebrated in the winter between January and February, depending on which clan was involved. So all the clans would have their own bear festivals. And it was organised by a family to honour the death of a kinsman, so it's related to ancestor worship in a sense. The bear was considered a sacred earthly manifestation of their ancestors, which is the same as in quite a lot of other cultures that I'll mention. And as part of the festival, a bear cub would be captured and raised by the Nivka women and treated as a god, fed with human food. And if too young to eat solid food, it would be nursed by a Nivka mother from her own breast. So they treated the bear cubs better than their own children, really, because they saw them as deities. During the festival, the bear would be dressed in specially made ceremonial costume and offered a banquet to be taken back to the realm of the gods, who would then show benevolence towards the clan. After the banquet, the bear would be killed and eaten in an elaborate ceremony, and the bear spirit would then return to the gods of the mountains happy, rewarding the people with bountiful forests. So there's an idea there of the bear being a messenger between the worlds and able to move between the human world and the realm of the gods and bring messages and bring back good things from the gods to the people. The festival was suppressed during Soviet occupation, but it's made a modest revival now, but they don't think of it as religious anymore. It's a cultural thing that they're reclaiming their cultural festivals. But at least I don't really know what that involves, because I can't believe that they actually kill a bear. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see.
They used to in Peru, used to kill a llama at the winter solstice, which
Okay.
of course is our solstice.
Yes, yes.
But the tourists stop them from doing it.
No, that's right. Well,
I actually do.
I wouldn't be against them killing a bear, but I can't believe that they do it, because if it's cultural and not religious, then in a sense they'd just be doing it they wouldn't be
As
doing
an exercise,
it.
they wouldn't be doing it for the right
They wouldn't be
reasons,
doing it
yeah.
because they felt the meaning of it, would they?
Oh.
Well, I don't know, because they might say it's cultural and then they've got...
Yeah, exactly. It's the tourist fault saying it's
Yeah,
cultural.
well, there's lots of layers
But-
to these things, aren't there?
Yeah.
I mean, there always are. And the bear was also prominently worshipped in Finnish paganism, who believed the bear to have come from the sky and to have the ability to reincarnate. And there was a celebration called Carbon Paijaset, which means celebration of bear, which was arranged to honour the bear spirit, which was then sacrificed for a banquet. So there's a bit of a theme here, which I shall mention in a moment, of sacrificing the bear and then eating it. And the idea of the bear ceremony for the Finnish pagans was to convince the bear spirit that it was deeply respected by the people, so that it would reincarnate back into the forest. And the sacrifice was designed to continue the bear's existence in the woods. So the idea was that they would kill the bear in a very sacred and ceremonious way, so that it would return to the woods afterwards as another bear, and that would keep bears in the forest. And the bear meat would then be eaten and the bones buried. And this is where they talk about skulls, because in Finland, the skull, which was believed to contain the bear's spirit or soul, was placed high in a sacred pine tree. So the skulls would be treated in a particularly sacred way. You go back 75,000 years and people were doing that, and then we're talking about much more modern times when the bear skulls would be hung up in trees. Indeed, the bear was considered the most sacred of all animals, and its name was never said aloud. For this reason, it was known by many euphemisms, which can be translated as mead paw, which I imagine comes from the honey connection, wide brow, and dweller of the land. The Ainu people, who live on certain islands in the Japanese archipelago, call the bear Kamui, which translates as God, and they believe the bear to be the head of the gods and to be God appearing in animal form on earth. To return the god back to his country, the people would kill and eat the animal in a ritual called amante. That would always involve an adult bear, that particular ceremony. If they caught a bear cub, they would perform a different ritual called Iamanti, which means sending off. So again, this is very similar to the other festival that I talked about in Russia, where they care for the cub, feeding it human food until it was 2 to 3 years old, when it would be taken to the altar and sacrificed. I think that's quite an interesting idea, because if you cared for a creature as though it's your child for 3 years, and then you sacrifice it, that's an incredibly powerful...
I was going to say,
That's not
very
something...
difficult thing to do.
Yes, that's not something that you would take lightly. So, yeah, it's interesting to think about what...
breastfed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Considering all those teeth.
So it's a really yeah. I think they only breastfed them before they had teeth. But they must have got very attached to them.
Yeah.
And if they were looking after them in that way, they would have been very socialised human beings as well. So they would have been very painful things, which just shows how important it was to them, really, to me. Because if you sacrifice something, this is what I will say when we do rituals, if you're sacrificing something, you can't sacrifice something that doesn't mean anything to you. You know, if you bring flowers to a ceremony, you should spend more than you can afford in a way, because it should hurt you. Sacrifice is really about hurting you to an extent, not so that it damages you, but it should make you feel that you've done something that matters. And the ceremony for the Ainu would occur in midwinter. All these ceremonies seem to be in midwinter, and that would be when the bear meat was particularly tasty, because the bears would have laid down fat for the winter. So it's interesting that all these ceremonies, they would have had religious meaning, and I'm sure that they meant a great deal to the people, but also they happened to be at a time when the meat was particularly nutritious and tasty. And there's always this practical, pragmatic element to all these things, and I think we forget about those things. I think that things are practical and they get meanings layered onto them, and all those things are woven together. One of the taboos of all Indigenous people really is that you never eat the meat of your totem, ever. And one of the meanings of totem is sister skin. So it means you're eating your own family, your own self, which of course is this bear thing where you've raised the bear from when it's a cub to be 3 years old. And that if you're going to eat the flesh of your totem, you have to find an excuse really to do it. And so you layer on these ceremonies which mean that you can do that. So there's all sorts of cultures that do that. Some of the Inuit cultures with seals have particular ways of looking at the seals that mean that they can kill them and eat them, but they have to build these meanings onto it to be able to do that. So in the Oni ceremony, the villagers would shoot the bear with both normal and ceremonial arrows, and then make offerings, dance and pour wine on top of the corpse. And then the words of the sending off for the bear god were recited. And the festival would last for 3 days and 3 nights. So it was a big, it was a big thing for them, particularly in midwinter, when presumably they didn't have much food. They put a lot of energy and effort into sending the bear off properly, and they would have had the bear meat as part of that. But these things aren't small things to people, because in the winter you haven't really got tired. Well, you haven't got the energy for 3 days and 3 nights of jumping about, and it's a big thing.
Yeah.
And also, it's the way we celebrate winter solstice. It's like you, at the time when you've got the least, and life is the most squashed down, really, and that's when you celebrate, and that's when you really go for it. As an affirmation of the fact that you believe it will come back, and also it's sympathetic magic, isn't it? Because if you act as though something will happen, then it will happen. So there's all these sort of meanings as well, I think, with bear
We mustn't
worship.
forget that they suffer from sad as well as a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
it was a lift.
That's right. So the bear was a central kind of figure in that whole process. And the Sami people, who are the indigenous people of northern Europe, encompassing parts of northern Sweden, Norway, Finland and Russia, also honoured the bear, and their religion was shamanistic up until the 18th century, and possibly still is, but whatever's there now is not an original religion, really. It's something they're rediscovering in the same way that we are, in a way. So it's sort of neo-Sami religion in that sense. But I always think that I don't really like the idea of neo-paganism, because I think whatever it is, it's what you feel from nature, and that isn't rediscovering, that's just people being what people are. Because I always think shamanism is what people would be if they were just put somewhere and they'd never heard of any other religion. That is what people would naturally do and be, and we can all do that anyway, so it's not that we're trying to look back at all, we're just being what people are. So the Sami honour the bear, and their healers visualise themselves as bears when they drum, which I think is a really beautiful symbol. And in some, I think the Native Americans of North America believe that bears are one of the creatures who can help with healing, because it's believed that they are able to go out into the land and find the plants that they need if they're ill, that they can always find the right plant. So there's the idea that by following the bear or calling up the bear, you'll find the right healing for any illness. And in Siberia, the words for female shaman and bear are the same. And in some Siberian languages, the word for bear also means ancestral spirit. So it's always going back to this ancestor thing, which I think is an incredibly old form of human worship. So the Sami religion was primarily animistic. They worshipped spirits called the Haldi, who watched over nature and were found in many forms within nature, and the bear was considered to be the animal lord within that. In the living goddess, Maria Gimbutas suggests that the bear is linked to Matrona, the Celts' name for the great goddess, and she says that the bear, together with the deer, consistently appears with the birth-giving goddesses, with her often incarnating in these forms to assist with the birthing and nursing of the young. So we've had the bear linked to death and ancestors, and now we've got the bear linked to birth and life. And those two things are the real primal things of existence. Really, there isn't anything else. There's birth and there's death. Those are the real things. And the bear is linked to both. So the bear's history, Maria Gimbutas says, as the cosmic nurturer, extends back into the Upper Paleolithic, when people would have seen the bear's annual pattern of hibernation and reawakening, which is a perfect symbol of death and regeneration. This would have been a powerful symbolism for people, because the bear not only emerged from the cave alive, but also brought new life with her, the cub that had been born and nursed during the winter. So I don't know if you've heard this, but the phrase licked into shape comes from the birth of bear cubs, because people would see the bear going off into the cave and having no food all winter, and then she'd miraculously appear with babies, and they didn't really understand how that would have happened. And there was an idea that the bear had created the babies from the flesh of her own body and from the fur from her own body, and that she'd licked it to make it into another. Yeah, so when people talk about licked into shape, they're talking about baby bears. And I always think the bear goddess, when I work with the bear goddess, I think she gives me a bit of a telling off sometimes, and I feel like she's licking me into shape.
Yeah.
So I like to think of that when I'm having a bad time sometimes in the spring, and I think the bear goddess is telling me something that I should be doing. So Maria Gimbutas describes numerous bear motifs used in creating beautiful lamps, vases, figurines and offering containers. In Baltic belief, the bear was linked to the goddess Lema or fate. As late as the mid-20th century, a pregnant woman or recently confined mother was called the bear. In modern times, the bear is still sacred to the Virgin Mary, with her local name being Panagia Arcutissa, which means Our Lady, the Sweet Bear. And Maria Gimbutas also says that the motherly qualities of the bear, who is a fierce defender and careful nurse of her young, made her from at least the Neolithic an ancestress and double birth-giving and protecting goddess. So closer to home, the Gauls of Western Europe, who practised a form of animism again, giving human characteristics to lakes, streams and mountains and other natural features, also honoured the bear mother, who was known to them as Artio, but also Andata, which means powerful bear, and Andate. And the name Artio means bear. It's related to the Gaelic Artos and Old Irish art and the Welsh Arth, which is where the word Arthur comes from. There's actually no evidence of a bear goddess called Arthur, but in the will of Bridget Anna we call her Arthur anyway. It's an intuition to call her that, but there are many bear goddesses whose root name is Art, so it comes from that. And of course King Arthur may come from the name bear, so he's also one of the bear deities. And that root name Art comes from the Greek Arctos, and also the Latin Ursus comes from bear. So when you find St Ursula's convents, for instance, that's linked to bears. One of the places where I linked to the bear goddess in London is Greenwich Park. And there's a place in Greenwich Park where the tumuli are, where there's Saxon burial mounds in Greenwich Park. And they found a bear claws buried there, presumably from when bears actually walked there. I don't think it's that anybody buried them. But it's interesting that there is a St Ursula's convent right next to that part of the park. So, you know, all these themes, they kind of... And people who are more psychic than myself have seen a giant bear walking there. And as I say, because she is the fire goddess in our wheel, so we called her at spring equinox, and it's all about fire coming back into life. And a few years ago, we decided to have our spring equinox ritual on this little patch of Greenwich Park, which felt like a really nice thing to do because it's linked to the bear, and we thought, oh, this will be great, we'll do it there. And we quite often go to Greenwich Park, but the place we went to, although it is a place where the bear there's an energy of the bear there, it's also called Snow Hill or Plum Pudding Hill. And it's where the snow well is that Jack Gale talks about, the goddess Holder, who's the goddess of winter. And we'd actually been there at winter solstice to celebrate winter solstice around the well. And this is just above the well. And we decided to go there and call the fire. And we were just doing that, and it was freezing. I've never been so cold in my life. And all of a sudden there was a massive hailstorm, just massive. And you could see it coming across the sky. There were hailstones that felt that big. All of us, we sort of went purple. You know when it's so cold that you go purple? And we had to flee. We literally had to pack all our stuff and flee for our lives, it felt like. And then afterwards we thought, well, that's interesting, because we were trying to call fire on a hill called Snow Hill, that's sacred to a goddess of winter, so it probably wasn't that good an idea. I don't think she was that pleased with us. But then these are the things that made me think the things we do are real, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you kind of think, oh, I'm just doing this thing and it's lovely and beautiful and it means something to me. But then something like that happens and you think, oh, I better properly think about these things. We have thought about it, but we obviously were wrong. So there you are. So it's believed that the name Art, linked to bear, possibly came from Indo-European Sanskrit, Arcto, which may mean destroyer. And in Greece, the root of the goddess Artemis's name is Art or bear. And she's said to have changed her nymph Callisto into a bear and chased her with hounds on discovering that she had become pregnant by Zeus. And then Zeus later saved Callisto and her son by turning them into bears, and placing them in the heavens as Ursa Major and Ursa Minor. I was thinking about that story actually. It's not a very nice story on Artemis because all her nymphs were sworn to be virgins, which of course means woman unto herself. It doesn't mean a woman who hasn't had sex. And yet this story is about Callisto being raped by Zeus and becoming pregnant, and then Artemis punishes her by turning her into a bear and then chases her and tries to kill her, and then Zeus saves her. Well, that seems to me not to be possibly what the original story might have been, and I'm going to think about this a bit more, because I think, it's seeing a goddess whose name is linked to bear, Artemis, turning one of her number into a bear as a punishment. Now, that doesn't make sense.
And then hunting her as well.
And then hunting her to kill her. So killing an animal, which comes from her own name, it's a bit like the Blodeuwedd myth in Welsh stories about her being turned into an owl as a punishment. But the owl is a sacred bird, and another side of Blodeuwedd, naturally, it's not. These things that are called punishments, I think they're patriarchal religions putting their meanings on top of stories, which would have meant something else. If we had the minds of people who lived before those patriarchal myths, we might understand what they meant. And of course, virgin doesn't mean woman who hasn't had sex, so I don't believe that is what the story would have been anyway. You know, I sometimes wonder, because Artemis was seen as a virgin goddess, but I sometimes wonder whether she had this other side, the more sexual side, which was split off into Callisto, which was the bear, and then it's that kind of setting up of her, like Athena and Medusa were part of the same goddess probably originally and got split off from one another. So I should think about that a bit more, because I was just thinking about that today when I was reading the myth, and I thought, well, that doesn't sound right at all. So Ursa Major, which is what Callisto became in the story, is one of the most spectacular and well-known constellations in the northern night sky, and it's said in the Iliad to have been one of the cosmological designs on the shield made for Achilles by Hephaestus. He is believed to have fashioned a shield for Achilles with Ursa Major on it. So Ursa Major was one of the really important constellations in ancient times, and it was linked to the Axis Mundi, or the world tree. So that's linking back again to the idea of the bear skull being put in the tree, which would have been a sacred pine tree, which again would have been linked to the world tree. So always the bear is linked to the centre of everything, and to the ancestors, and to birth and death. So there's all these really powerful themes always going on with the bear, and whatever culture, they always seem to be the same themes over and over again, which I think shows how old the worship of the bear is. Because I think if the meanings are the same in so many cultures, that means that it's gone back a long way and been spread out. So I think that the bear goddess is one of the really primal goddesses that we have and that we still know about. And in the Wheel of Bridget Anna, we have the 8 directions, and we've got goddesses at every direction. And the cross quarters in Bolt, Beltane, Lammas and Samhain are linked to the maiden, the lover, the mother and the crone. And then the equinoxes and solstices are linked to the elemental goddesses. So Arta is one of the elemental goddesses. But I think the bear is interesting actually to try and trap a goddess in a particular direction, I think, because the bear, of course, I think she would go all the way around the wheel, because of course in the summer, which we have as water, which is irregular, but that's what we do, the bear, of course, is fishing in the rivers, feeding her young. Now in autumn she goes into the earth, so in spring she comes out, in autumn she goes in to hibernate, so she's gathering and eating enough to keep her going through the winter, so you can work with her in that way in the autumn. And then in the winter she's the sleeping, dreaming goddess of the winter. So I think you can work with her all the way around the wheel, and I certainly do. And I think some of them just feel they're deeper than some of the others. I think the reindeer goddess as well feels like a really deep meaning. There's just something about some of them that you can't attach to a story, and you can't attach to anything other than that you just really feel something is going on with them. And I think that's one of the things about the bear goddess. We mainly call her Arthur, but my friend Geraldine, who knows about pronunciation, tells us all off, and she says it should be Arta. So, yeah, I don't know if I said the Slovenian goddess is called Divana, so I've not found out anything about her yet. I don't know I'm not sure where the root of her name would come from, because Divana isn't anything to do with bear in Slovenian, because apparently the Slavic languages, but the bear's name is linked to the word, it's spelled Medhur, which comes from honey. And we actually met somebody in Slovenia who said that his surname was linked to the bear and it meant knower of honey. So that it's more linked to honey in the Slavic languages. So I don't know where Divana comes from, and I must look into that, but that would be very interesting. And here are some pictures that I drew of the bear goddess in 2003, and this is her with the spring in her belly, protecting it. So, yes.